What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Got a different style video coming today. It's kind of like this little series I want to start. I'm gonna call it on the road, or like over the road driving lesson. Not a lesson on driving, but a lesson about, you know, Nissan stuff, specifically 350Z, you know, 370Z, G35, G37, just informational, something you guys can listen to while you work, or you're maybe, you know what I'm saying, listen to it like a podcast, something. If you want to watch, cool, you know, but I'll be driving every now and then, maybe might give a pull, who knows, whatever. But it's mainly about the lesson. It's mainly a listening thing, talk heavy, information heavy. And to start it off on episode 1, this is going to be DE versus HR. I'm specifically speaking only DE, you know, non-rev up, a little bit of rev up versus HR. Not really concerned with VHR right now, just DEs versus HR. You know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, what's better and what have you. So let's just get right into it. So, like we all know, 350Zs, when they first came out, first engine that they came with was the DE, non-rev up. Red line at 6,600 RPM, makes about 287 crank wheel horsepower. Crank wheel horsepower, yeah. Crank horsepower, versus the HR, you know, which had a lot of revisions, a lot of things that Nissan messed up on with the DE. They essentially fixed it with the HR. What am I talking about? Well, let's go with the obvious differences first. The DE is a single throttle body, for one. The HR is a dual throttle body car. Not saying that Nissan messed up or anything, but you know, they did upgrade to the dual throttle body setup, not only, you know, to help with emissions, but they did it to help spread the airflow across the entire plenum, so that all the cylinders get an equal amount of air, resulting in better airflow and better horsepower, torque, more horsepower and torque. So that's like the obvious difference. On the DE non-rev up, you have variable valve timing on the intake cam only. The exhaust cam does not have any valve timing. On the rev up DE, there is exhaust cam timing, like the HR. So let's get it out the way. The DE's got a single throttle body. The HR has dual throttle body. The DE non-rev up is single VVT with just only on the intake cam, and the HR and rev up DEs have VVT on both the intake cam and the exhaust cam. So those are your obvious right off how to tell right off differences. But when you dig into the engine a little bit more, well, you dig into the whole setup, you start to see there's actually a lot of differences. The HR is about 80%, the engine is 80% different from the DE. So that should let you know, like, yeah, they're part of the same family, but the HR engine is essentially a whole new engine. It's not a DE whatsoever. And one of the differences I know we can talk about is, you know, the cam size, for one. On the HR, cams are much bigger. On the DE, you have on the intake cams, the intake cams are 238 duration with, I believe, a 9.57 millimeter lift. On the HR, it's a 248 duration with, if I'm not mistaken, a 10.4 or 10.5 millimeter lift. So that right off the rip is a big difference. People wonder why the DE falls on its face after about 6,000 RPM, and that's mainly because of, one, the intake plenum design in factory form doesn't really supply an equal amount of air to the front two cylinders, number one. Number two, the cams are small. They got a small lift, a small duration. The cams on the DE, in my opinion, are kind of like how you would see cams on a truck, like for towing or something like that. Like, it produces a lot of torque, boatloads of torque, and but the trade-off of the torque is the up top horsepower. Excuse me, specifically after 6,000 RPM. With the HR, you see a drop off in torque a little bit, but you see them making power all the way up through the power band, up to 7,500 RPM. They're still making power. They don't fall on their face, and that is mainly due to the cam sizing, cam profiles. Also, the HR intake manifold plenum has been revised, obviously, to fit dual throttle bodies, but it's been it's been revised so that it does distribute air throughout the entire plenum, and all the cylinders get an equal amount of air, or next to equal. So that's on the anyways. On the exhaust side, the HR has equal length headers from factory. Unlike the DE, the DE has log style, very restrictive headers. And I know they probably did this for manufacturing purposes. The exhaust manifolds. HRs have equal length headers from factory. I do believe that the DE was produced with the log style manifold. I'm gonna go on a limb and say it might have had something to do with the state of where Nissan was at during the production of the 350Z. If you know your Nissan history, you'll know that the Z was produced during a time where Nissan was being acquired by Renault, and Nissan had lost a lot of money in the 90s, man. Nissan lost a lot of money, and they were just looking anywhere where they can save money. And for manufacturing purposes, creating a log style, cast style manifold was much easier. It is a compact fit in the engine bay, so making it that way was, for packaging purposes, it was beneficial to Nissan, not beneficial to performance. But by the time the HR came around, Nissan had released the GTR, made some of their money back, you know, and they were a little bit more performance minded. And also they realized that the stock headers on the DE, for lack of a better word, were dog shit, and they needed to change them. The DEs have a bad reputation for burning oil. Part of that is because of the horrible header design. What happens, these headers are so restrictive and they flow so horribly that you get what's called reversion. And all headers are going to have reversion, but the thing is, when your reversion is so bad that it's bringing exhaust air back, exhaust pulses back into the cylinders, and what's happening is the catalytic converters were breaking down. And if you got catalytic converters breaking down coupled with reversion happening, where do you think those catalytic converter pieces go? They get sucked into the cylinders, scratch up the walls. Thus, the piston rings can't seal properly. Then you get blow by. Blow by is just another word for burning oil. You know, that oil's got to come somewhere. It goes right out. It goes past the rings into the combustion chamber and out your exhaust, and that's how you see the puff of blue smoke happening. Your rings are gone. So that's why you'll see a lot of people with 350Zs, DEs, they'll take the cats off and run test pipes. You know, that is part of the reason why that's a thing. You don't necessarily have that problem with HRs because, number one, they do have a better header design, far superior than that log design they gave the DE, and just a finer tuned exhaust. Also, you can also hear it in the sound of the exhaust note. HRs do sound a bit different. Part of that is because of the header design. Okay, for the DE now, on the intake side, how do you fix the manifold situation? As I mentioned earlier, the front two cylinders don't get an equal distribution of airflow because of the slant that's on the plenum. You guys can see, for those of you who have one, you'll see that the intake plenum is slanted. Well, this is why you see a lot of people using plenum spacers. You know, an easy fix to that is getting a 5/16 spacer. I have one. I got a block spacer. You know, a lot of companies make them. Motordyne, Z1. There's a lot of companies that make them out there, but that's where that modification came from. You know, they wanted to get in those front two cylinders to getting a good amount of air, so that's why the plenum spacers were created. Not only do they make power, and you know, they do, you know, change the sound of your car a little bit if you actually, you know, pay attention, but they fix a pivotal issue that's with the DE, and that is with the intake manifold.